in-depth look at the issues and people making news in North Carolina. Here's your host, Sonia Williams.
The numerous police killings of unarmed African Americans across the country have sparked angry and anguished debate over how police treat African Americans. From Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri to Sandra Bland in Texas, an encounter with a law officer could have deadly consequences. On today's show, we take a look at a project designed to help both constituents and law officers stay safe. It's called UN-50, and its goal is to reduce injuries to citizens and officers during encounters. Joining me now is BJ Council, founder of UN-50. BJ is also retired deputy police chief with the Durham Police Department, and Steve Chalmers. Mr. Chalmers is also he is the retired police chief of the Durham Police Department. Lots of experience in law enforcement here. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Now, we can't turn on the television, log on to social media outlets without hearing a story about a police officer harming an African American man, woman, child. Why is that?
I think because it's just a media, and there's a lot of video, and it's just getting a lot of attention because of the media that we have is drawing attention to that. And people are just becoming concerned about the interaction. So I think because of all the access to getting that information out, I think that's kind of why it's out there right now.
What efforts are being made to end this? Because I know we've got the movements Black Lives Matter, we've got politicians speaking out. How can we even begin to end this type of violence?
Well, UN-50, what we're trying to do is to educate, like you said, the constituents and law enforcement, because we believe if an educated constituent understands their basic rights, then that's going to improve. And then law enforcement will understand that basically people don't understand their rights. And when you understand your rights, you have power. And that's what this program is about.
When you talk about understanding your basic rights, I know that there are some things that people need to understand, need to know when dealing with law officers. I want you to go back to your law enforcement days and just give us a little bit of history and background on the training that law officers undergo. And I know it's not exactly the same from county to county and state to state, but just give us an idea of that training when it comes to dealing with other cultures and other backgrounds.
Well, you know, first of all, I think every organization has a responsibility to make certain that all the officers that serve in the organization understand the philosophy, the policing philosophy that they're involved in. Years ago, community policing was kind of like the buzzword, and everyone was trying to look at how law enforcement agencies could work closer with the community. So with that in mind, a lot of different programs started being developed across the country with the community policing logo as its basis. And the same thing happened certainly in the Triangle area. So as officers come through, this is what they are trained to do, is to work closely with the community, start to get out of police cars, walk into communities, do problem-solving projects in communities, but work hand in hand with community. Because, you know, what we used to talk about a lot was communication, understanding, and trust. But it all starts with communication. If you don't have strong and positive communication in the community, you're certainly not going to have trust. And I think that's what we're looking at right now. I think even though law enforcement agencies believe in community policing, some of that has kind of fallen by the wayside, and more enforcement tactics have actually taken their places. So with the push on law enforcement agencies to solve crime, they become crime-solving agents more so than community agents. So what we're going to have to do is kind of revisit and look at from whence we've come to start going back to that community policing philosophy and start to implement that as the way we do business.
Absolutely. From a constituent's perspective, what are some of the challenges when interacting with law enforcement?
But it really is not understanding your rights. I mean, you have a right to refuse search. That's one of the things that we talk about during the presentation. And the presentation is for anybody. Everybody can use this information. It was born out of what's going on across the country, but anybody can use the information. And people just don't know that you can refuse a consent. People come up, the officer may ask you, can I search your vehicle? you can refuse to search. You can say no to that. People don't realize that. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to not search, but you have a right to refuse the search. So just giving them that kind of basic information and power, and kind of letting them know why an officer can come up and talk to you. Just real simple, basic stuff.
But if would not saying no escalate to maybe something a little more heated exchange between an officer and a person, constituent?
It should not. The officer has been trained. They understand what they can do and what they can't. They understand reasonable suspicion. They understand probable cause. And they understand that they need certain, within the guidelines of the law, what they can do to search. And they can ask the question. Officers should be professional. If the individual says, no, I refuse to consent, they either don't do the search, or if they have the necessary information, the probable cause, then they will proceed with the search. But the officer is aware of that. And if he begins to have an attitude, you just remain calm and file a complaint at a later date.
Mm-hmm. Now, is it customary, and I'm thinking about an incident that my older son had. He's 20 years old. He was in the car with 4 of his friends. Police officer stopped him because the license tags had been expired for 1 day. And then proceeds to ask everyone in the car for ID. Is that something that is standard procedure? I happened to be on the phone with my son at the time, and I told him, put the phone down and just do what he says. But is that standard procedure?
Well, just backing up, and before we get into that, one of the things that we encourage with UN-50 is compliance.
Okay.
Education and knowledge is power. But we don't want to try to educate you about your rights and allow you to use that as a weapon or use that to resist law enforcement efforts. BJ does the presentation on a regular basis and talking to youth and letting them know there are 2 sides to every story. And one of the things that you don't understand from the perspective of the driver of that vehicle and the passengers in that car is what information that law enforcement officer is actually operating on. You don't know what kind of radio call he's gotten. You don't know what kind of description he's received. You don't know what's going on. So in order to go through this process without anyone getting injured, and if you're innocent and haven't done anything, going to jail, is just to comply. If they're asking for information as relates to identification, provide the identification. We teach you what your rights are as it relates to searches and things like that, so you can resist, but you resist in a manner that's not going to incite a problem.
Absolutely, and we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. Before we go to break, how can people find out more information about UN-50?
They can go to the website, un50.com, or either call 697-8917, and we will come out and talk to them for a presentation. Just let us know.
All right, we're going to take a break and talk more in just a minute.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more on UN-50 after these messages. Today's show focuses on a program that prepares people to have safe interactions with law enforcement. UN-50 teaches participants about their constitutional rights and how to safely interact with officers during traffic stops and other encounters on the street. With us again is the founder of UN-50, BJ Council, and Steve Chalmers, retired police chief with the Durham Police Department. Now, before the break, BJ, you were talking about this program, UN-50, being for everyone. Talk a little bit more about some of your target audiences and people that you've done your presentations for over the past couple of months.
Okay. Our target audience are the young black and brown youth, just because of what's been going on across the country. But we're also trying to get into the reentry program from the prison. We want to talk to those individuals that are coming back into the community, because we want them to be able to understand how they need to interact and not catch a simple charge just because possibly of the failure to just simply comply. So we want to figure out a way to get to them and do that. But it's mainly for the youth, to get them to understand the compliance, that they have rights. and we want them to understand what that is. And like he said before, it really is about compliance as much as possible, as much as you can do that. Mainly we want you to be in the offensive, and with as much video and media, somebody's probably going to be pulling out a phone and videotaping something, and you want to be in a position of being offensive, because if there's one officer chasing you, there's 20 officers. You might see one behind you, but there's 20 coming, and we want you to be able to get through that encounter safely.
And it's important for people to know just what you were saying. If there's one chasing you, there are 20 more coming. Information like that, as you were saying earlier, knowledge is power, and that's what this program is all about.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
When you talk to young people, what are some of the, I guess, the questions that come up from them, or some of their experiences that they've shared with you that would be helpful, I think, for the general public to know?
Well, they ask questions like, well, why does an officer do such and such? Why do they say that? Why do they make me do this? Why do they come up on me, and they have no reason to come up on me, and they approach me, and they want to know, why can an officer do that? And that's kind of what we talk about. We give them examples of, one example is if you're walking downtown at 3 o'clock in the morning and there is a burglary alarm going off, there's reasonable suspicion if you're close by that you may know something about it, so the officer is probably going to stop you. So just trying to give them an understanding that if you're doing something that looks suspicious, there's a possibility that they're going to approach you, and just kind of check the attitude and do what you need to do and to get through the process. And if the interaction is not well, or you think the officer is being rude to you, take down the information and file a complaint. And that's what, I mean, there are a million contacts that go on every day with law enforcement officers. We don't know anything about it. It's the few reckless officers that giving the rest of the brothers and sisters in this particular law enforcement community a bad rap. For the most part, the officers across this country are doing a great job.
Absolutely. And another point to that is, officers are also, they're putting their lives on the line on a daily basis to keep us safe. So certainly want to keep that in mind. But as you are sharing information and trying to educate the public, what are some of the most important things that you think people should know? Should they, be stopped by the cops or confronted on the street by the police? What are some basic steps or principles they need to follow?
Well, again, as I said earlier, one of the things that, first of all, you don't know is why you're being stopped in most cases. Sometimes you may, because, we talked about expired license tag.
Right.
That's a reason to stop, not coming to a complete stop at a stop sign, changing lanes erratically. There could be a number of reasons why you are being stopped. And again, what that officer just received over his radio as it relates to a crime that's occurred, or be on the lookout for whatever. And it may be just an investigative stop. So the thing of it is that once you stop, just stay calm, comply, ask questions. If you get answers, then it may help you to understand why you're being stopped. But sometimes you may run up on that officer who is going to be belligerent and who's not going to answer your question, who's going to just tell you, just be quiet and do what I say do. You get into that situation, comply, give ID, try to get through the stop as quickly as possible and move on. And as BJ said, if you feel that you've been stopped for no good reason, file a complaint, contact the police department or the sheriff's department, whatever the agency is, and have them to follow up. They have an obligation to follow up and contact you back to let you know why you were stopped and if any actions are going to be taken.
And I think that's important for people to understand as well. When it comes to your constitutional rights, when you are stopped by the police, are there any other major ones that you share with people during your presentation?
Yeah, we talked to them about the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search. We talked to them about that. We talk a little bit. We talk about that and probable cause, and we also let them know that they don't have to answer questions. I mean, they can say, you can refuse to speak to the officer, or I want a lawyer, because then the officer should stop talking to you then. So basically, if you say that, the officer knows that based on his or her training that they can no longer talk to the individual, so they can complete whatever they're doing and move on, issue the ticket, and that's because that's all they really need to have from them. But we give them kind of the basic stuff to get them through the process, because really once they say that, the officer can't talk to you anymore, ask you any more questions.
So what happens if the officer continues to ask questions after that, or continues to try to communicate with you after that?
You just say, I want to talk to a lawyer.
Okay, and then they are obligated to stop.
You're obligated to stop, yes.
Absolutely. When you do your presentations and you're talking to various groups, what are some of the primary concerns that constituents have about law enforcement and their relationship in the community?
I think, you know, they look at what we are trying to do and they say, well, even if we comply, even if we do this, there's no guarantee that the outcome is going to be as favorable as we think it should be.
Right.
What about law enforcement? So again, we're just one part of the solution, and what we're trying to do ultimately is save lives, is prevent unnecessary injuries and deaths of young black men and women in the community. But at the same time, there's an obligation of law enforcement to step up their game to make certain that we're doing what we need to do to make certain that our officers are not overzealous when it comes to dealing with individuals on traffic stops and encounters on the street. So, so we've met with law enforcement, we've met with, you know, police department, sheriff department, and gotten full support from these agencies for what we're trying to do. At the same time, they're obligated and to look at their hiring practices and make certain that, you know, as far as recruiting is concerned, we're recruiting the right type of people. And going back to what we talked about earlier, training, make certain that we're providing the right type of training. But even beyond that, making certain that we have some type of early warning system within our organization will help us identify individuals who are not complying with our policing philosophy and are serving to the detriment of the community. And how do we identify those individuals and how we either change that mindset or move them out of the organization? So there's a large part that law enforcement is going to have to, you know, have to play, you know, as it relates to working with the community. Certainly the body cameras and different things like that they're implementing across the country is going to move us a long ways from establishing more trust and understanding with law enforcement, but it's going to, we're playing a small part, and our part again is to make certain that we're teaching people what your rights are and also how to use common sense along with, you know, understanding those rights and coming out of these situations without being harmed.
Definitely a lot of responsibility and accountability on both ends.
Yes.
Absolutely.
We're going to take a break. Steve Chalmers, retired police chief with the City of Durham, or Durham Police Department. We certainly thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us today. And BJ, will talk more with you in just a minute.
Thank you.
Still to come on Tar Heel Talk, how UNC-Greensboro is making an impact in the Triangle. Tar Heel Talk will continue after these messages. Welcome back to Tar Heel Talk. I'm Sonia Williams. The numerous police killings of unarmed African Americans across the country have sparked angry and anguished debate over how police treat African Americans. From Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri to Sandra Bland in Texas, an encounter with a law officer could have deadly consequences. We've been talking today about a local program designed to keep both the citizen and the law officer safe during an encounter. It's called UNC-Greensboro, and with this again is its founder, BJ Council, who is also a retired deputy police chief for Durham Police Department, and Harmony Chavis. Harmony is double majoring in social work and pre-med at UNC-Greensboro. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Harmony, from a young person's perspective, what are your peers saying about law officers and their interaction with law enforcement?
I think it differs. You know, I have some people that are from very rough neighborhoods. I know some of them, and then I know some that are from very affluent neighborhoods. And their interactions with law enforcement, you know, varies greatly. But I think a really, really big part of it is the compliance issue. UNC-Greensboro does preach compliance, and I agree with it. But at the same time, we acknowledge collectively that we don't we shouldn't have to be compliant in order to be respected. That's a big thing that comes up.
That's a powerful point. What do you say to young people who feel that way?
We agree with that. We totally agree with that, because it goes back to the training. I mean, if the officers are interacting with individuals in a professional manner, then you're automatically going to get the compliance. It's when you start not acting in a professional manner that you kind of get people on edge and get them caught. So we totally agree with that thought. We just have to continue to talk about compliance, because it's a way to get out of the situation.
And you've spent a lot of time talking with young people in the Triangle. What type of impact is UN-50 making? Are you seeing some results of your efforts?
Not yet. Just based on right after the presentation, they tell me that they've learned something, things they did not know that they could do, not do, what an officer can do. So that lets me know that it's educational and that it can be powerful for them.
As a person who is looking at a career in both medicine and social work, how important is it to have this type of information for young people who one day may cross your path as a client?
I think it's incredibly important, for everybody, not just the young people. We see people that are dying every single day. Michael Brown could have found the cure to cancer. We have no idea the extent of the people that we've lost because of these senseless killings. And we discussed the compliance issue, and had you been compliant, maybe things would have gone a different way. We can't say that for sure. We don't know. Right. We don't have that ability. But I think it's important to assess how we distribute value to people, specifically Black bodies. There are a lot of people that don't value the Black body, whether it's a Black female, a Black male, a Black child. We saw at the Spring Valley High School in South Carolina that disrespect to the Black body. So I think it's very important to understand that you can't avenge your death from the grave. And UN-50 understands that this is definitely just one piece of the problem, but we have to do our part in keeping our people safe.
But powerful words, certainly important information, that compliance piece. When we look at some of the videos, you can see people, and of course hindsight is 20/20, people running away from the police. That is a part of that compliance piece. Absolutely. Don't run.
Right. And it's hard to tell people that because some individuals, that's what they decide to do. And we explain to them, if you decide to run, then we actually tell them what to do when they decide, oh, I got to give up. We tell them to drop to their knees and put their hands up so the officer can see. Because if you drop to your knees, you're basically saying, I am done running. And if you put your hands up, there's nothing they can see that you have any weapons. So we at least let them know, if you make that choice to run and then you figure out that it's not, that you're going to get caught, this is what you need to do. So, and then wait for instructions and to comply with the instructions.
Right. Compliance from a young person. How do college students, teenagers, young adults view compliance? Is that something that they take seriously? What are your thoughts on
I think it's something that we take seriously, definitely, but I think it's something that is off-putting. We don't feel like we have to be compliant in order to be respected. The job of the police is to protect and serve these communities. So technically the police work for us. They're here to serve and protect us. And so we don't necessarily feel like we have to be respectful. We have to be compliant in order to be respected and not beaten to a bloody pulp or even killed. But I think it's also important to note that the purpose of UN-50 is to make sure that you're alive to see another day, and then you can report that officer so things can go a different way, and they're not able to abuse that power anymore, and they're not able to abuse these people anymore. And I think that that's the important piece, is as a community, we have to do better about reporting, following through, and making sure that we're actually alive to do those steps. Because, as much as I want to be combative with the police when they pull me over, it's happened several times, I know that I'm not able to avenge my death if I'm dead or if I'm incapacitated. So it's like you have to weigh the risk and the benefits in those moments. Is me being smart with you worth my life? And ultimately, I come to the answer that's no, it's not. It's not.
Absolutely, excellent point. BJ, you do presentations throughout the Triangle, trying to educate the public about their rights and how to handle themselves if stopped by the police. How can people find out more information and connect with you?
Our website is un5-o.com, and then our telephone number is 919-697-8917.
All right, BJ Council, founder of UN-50 and Harmony. Chavis, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and share this information with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's it for this week's Tar Heel Talk. To comment on this or other episodes of the show, send us a message on our Facebook page or an email to tarheeltalk@fox50.com. I'm Sonia Williams. Thanks so much for watching. Enjoy your week.